pairs and parallel. So the next one that we watched, The Wizard of Lies, for next week, which is a movie about Bernie Madoff, came out within a year of this movie, by the way. And so I remember the arrest of Madoff and all that stuff had already happened when this movie probably was being written and made. So there are some interesting parallels, I think, that we'll talk about more when we've watched them both. But talk about Norman came out in 2016, directed by an Israeli director. He was born in America, actually, but he moved to Israel when he was 5 years old with his family. So he grew up in Israel. But he did come back to study film at New York University at the Tisch School, which is one of the famous film schools in this country. So his name is Joseph Cedar. And if you're a fan of Israeli movies, you've probably seen his name and seen his movies. He's definitely one of the best and brightest of a new generation of Israeli filmmakers. Two of his movies have been Oscar nominated for Best Foreign Film. I think he may be the only director in recent years to be nominated, though Israeli films have been nominated in the past. But his movie Beaufort was nominated for, which is a story about Israel's war in Lebanon, and a movie called Footnote, which might be a little closer in tone and style to this movie, actually, was also nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Film. Made a couple of other films that did very well, nominated for Israel has its own kind of Academy Awards for the Israeli film industry, and he's done very well at those over the years with a movie. His first movie was called Time of Favor, which was based on his own time in the IDF. And he also made a movie called Campfire. I got to say that all of his movies are among my favorite of Israeli movies. I mentioned before to you guys that the Israeli film industry has really come of age in recent years, and that while they occasionally turned out an interesting or funny movie over the years, and that it was mostly pretty terrible until pretty recently. And even movies that were sometimes acclaimed, were like, well, maybe acclaimed by Israeli standards, but not Hollywood standards, let's say. So, so Joseph Cedar was born in New York City in 1968. In 1973, his family moved to Israel. He got a degree in philosophy and history at Hebrew University, and then came and did graduate work at NYU in film. So this movie is an Israeli-American co-production. It was filmed partly in Israel and partly in the United States, mainly New York City, of course. And it actually, the scenes that take place in the Knesset, in Israeli, in the seat of Israeli government, were actually filmed in the Knesset. The Knesset gave them permission to use the very halls that the prime minister and the members of Knesset sit in were used actually in the filming of this movie. So, which goes to show something about, I think, Joseph Cedar's connections, right, in Israel, that he is such a well-respected filmmaker. I mean, I don't know. I maybe wouldn't push it so far as to say he's like, if Steven Spielberg wanted to film something in the Capitol building, the United States might say yes, right? So that's the kind of stature that Cedar has in Israel. So, and Cedar, by the way, also wrote this movie as well as directing it. So he's both writer and director. And I believe he has a hand in editing it also, although he's not credited as the editor. But a couple of other names that I noticed in the credits, in particular, the music director for this is a guy named Hal Wilner, who passed away a couple of years ago. Actually, for many years, he was the music director of Saturday Night Live, and a Jewish musician, producer of music. You can see him there. Beloved in show business circles for the work he's done. So he wrote some music for this movie, I think, and he curates music, which is perhaps what he's best known for, is working on soundtracks and putting together the right songs for the use in the movie. The soundtrack is practically a character in this movie, I think. It's really that sort of jaunty, jazzy, sort of klezmery music that's part of the pace. It's a very fast pace movie, right? Is definitely a part of it. So I thought it was interesting to see Hal Wilner's name in the credits. Let's see, and I think I have one other note. There was someone else who showed up. No, I guess not. But so let's talk about the cast a little bit. Of course, long-standing tradition in Hollywood that Jews are rarely cast to play Jewish characters. So at least not as the stars of movies. So we've got Richard Gere playing Norman Oppenheimer. I'm actually a fan of Richard Gere. I don't know what you guys think of him, but I actually think of him in some ways as being kind of a modern day Cary Grant. I mean, he's always Richard Gere pretty much in whatever he does, but he can't sort of get away from being Richard Gere, and yet he takes interesting parts, and he I think he makes it look easy on screen, and that's something that I associate with some of those great stars like Cary Grant from the past. That it doesn't really matter what part he's playing; it just sort of comes easy, So definitely not Jewish. In fact, his family are descendants of people who came over on the Mayflower, on both sides of his family. He was born in 1949 in Philadelphia, and so the closest connection to the Jewish community I could really find is that he once dated Barbara Streisand, so back in the day. I think he does a pretty credible job here as Norman Oppenheimer. Other actors and actresses in the cast, Michael Sheen, who plays his nephew, Philip Cohen, is actually born in Wales. You may have seen him in other roles. I mean, he practically made a career out of playing Tony Blair. I think he's in two different movies, at least, playing Prime Minister Tony Blair. He also played David Frost in the movie version of Frost Nixon. He played Dr. Masters in the TV series about Masters and Johnson called Masters of Sex, which ran for a few seasons on one of the cable networks. A fine actor, actually, but I'm not so sure about his New York accent in this movie, but it's credible, I guess. But definitely also not Jewish. So the two main characters playing Jewish parts are not Jewish actors. And of course, Steve Buscemi plays the rabbi, and he is also, not surprising to know, not Jewish. His background is of his parents is Irish and Sicilian, I believe. He was born in 1957. It's definitely not the first time that he's played a Jewish character. He's been in a lot of movies that were made by the Coen brothers. We watched their movie A Serious Man a couple of years ago. But he's played characters in Coen brothers movies like Miller's Crossing and Fargo and The Big Lebowski. And he's also in practically every Adam Sandler movie for a while, in various parts there. Got his big break in a Quentin Tarantino movie, the first one that Tarantino directed, I think, Reservoir Dogs. So I think he plays Mr. Pink in that movie, if my memory serves. And he starred in a series on, again, one of the cable networks, Boardwalk Empire, a while back. So he's also had parts as a character actor in Con Air and Armageddon. It's carved out quite a career as a character actor, occasionally playing the lead. But here he plays Rabbi Blumenthal. He was born in 1971, I believe. Yeah. So so you have to go fairly far down the cast before you run into anybody who's Jewish in this movie. The two main investors in the movie, the character Joe Wolf and the character Arthur Taub, those are both played by Jews. That's Josh Charles, who plays the younger one, Arthur Taub. You might remember him from other TV shows that he was in. The Good Wife, I think maybe his biggest sort of TV star role. He was the co-star of a fairly short-lived but well-loved TV series before the West Wing. The creator of the West Wing, Aaron Sorkin, made a show about the loosely based on what it takes to put Sports Center on TV on ESPN. The show was called Sports Night, and Josh Charles played one of the co-anchors of the sports show in that one. Harris Yulin has been in hundreds of movies. He plays Joe Wilf, the older of the two money men in this movie. He was born in 1937, and he's Jewish. Too many movies to even talk about. I mean, but early in his career, he actually played Wyatt Earp in the movie about Doc Holliday that came out called Doc back in 1971. So he's been around Hollywood for a long time in different roles. The other one you may be a little surprised to know about, he shows up late in this movie. And one of the things that this movie and The Wizard of Lies has in common is they both have Hank Azaria in it. Hank Azaria, who in this movie plays the character who shows up near the end, kind of following him around and finally striking up a conversation with him. Srool Katz, I think is his name. Yeah. Srool Katz. And Hank Azaria actually is Jewish. He's Sephardic. Both his parents' families come from, I believe, Turkish. No, that's wrong. Greek Jewish descent. They lived in Salonika. And actually, if you thought that he was Hispanic, it's because he grew up speaking Ladino, which is sort of the Yiddish of Sephardic Jews. It's not a mixture of German and Yiddish, but more of a mix of Yiddish and Spanish. And the Jews of Thessalonica in Greece, actually were descendants of the Jews that left Spain, that were forced out of Spain in 1492. They created kind of a new home for themselves in Thessalonica, and in the 20th century, we're still speaking a Spanish that goes back to the 15th century. So Hank Azaria grew up fluent in English, Spanish, and Ladino. Interesting character actor in his own right, and a voice actor. If you are a fan or familiar with The Simpsons, he plays multiple roles in The Simpsons. In movies, he's probably maybe best known for The Birdcage, the movie with Robin Williams and and Nathan Lane, where he plays the butler who can't wear shoes, without tripping on his feet. He also was in a TV series a couple of years ago where he was the star called Brockmire, I think was the title, something like that, where he plays a sportscaster with a very messy personal life. So, a pretty interesting character actor, shows up from time to time. I saw him in the pre-Broadway run of Spamalot when it started here in Chicago. And he was nominated for the Tony. I think he may even have won the Tony for Best Supporting Actor in Spamalot once it got to New York. Yeah, I was surprised to find out that he was Jewish, to be honest. So some interesting characters in there. Of course, the actor playing the Prime Minister of Israel, the eventual Prime Minister of Israel, the character's name is Micha Eshel, is played by Lior Ashkenazi, a well-known actor in Israel. He was born in Tel Aviv. He appears in Joseph Ceder's earlier movie Footnote, and one of the first really, I think one of the first really great Israeli movies, a movie called Walk on Water. He appears in that as well. So he's a star in Israel. So let's talk about the movie and its technique and whether or not we consider it a classic. That's up to you. In the sense, I do think there's a certain part of this movie that feels like the director is showing off a little bit, and he throws everything but the kitchen sink into it. There's a lot of sort of showy kind of pieces in it. I'm thinking perhaps there are scenes where all these different voices come into play, and they come in and out with colored lights around them and stuff like that. There's a lot of sort of split screen where characters are talking to each other, and they each take up half of the screen, but they're not actually sharing screen time. So there's a lot of sort of showy technique in this movie. So not sure it all necessarily adds up to something, but it's part of the sort of frenetic pace, if you like, of the movie. I'm sure you probably noticed things like we never ever see where Norman lives. He doesn't have an office. We don't see much of his family life other than his relationship with his nephew, which all takes place within the work environment, right? His office is his phone, and sometimes he's in a dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman, and sometimes he's in a Staples office supply store, or wherever he is, right? That's his office. So, in fact, near the end of the movie, when the investigator, when he's talking to the investigator, and she says, everybody knows you, but nobody knows who you are, right? Something like that. It's kind of an interesting statement about this character. We see him late at night, we see him early in the morning, we see him at kind of all hours of the day, but we never see him get up out of a bed. I don't think we ever see him actually eat a meal. He's constantly chewing on things, right? Candy primarily, but I think he's taking some Sudafed, right? The only thing we actually really know about him and his life is his allergy to peanuts, right? Because he tells at least two different people that my wife was friends with this one. She used to babysit him, right? But by the end of the movie, it calls into question whether he even ever had a wife or a child. right? Things that he uses and says in various locations wherever he goes. Right? So
Uh,
we do see him eat. We see him eat herring at the synagogue, right? I mean, though I'm not sure we actually see him eat it, but we see him go into the synagogue, go into the kitchen, take out a jar of herring and some crackers, and after he's been asked to leave the home of Josh Charles's character, Arthur Taub. So,
and that's a split screen with the the soon-to-be prime minister eating oysters,
right, yeah,
which are treif. Okay,
that's
Susan.
Um, well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the characters in this movie. First of all, to me, Norman was such a pathetic character.
Yeah.
And then to have a rabbi who spoke the way that rabbi spoke and to be so violent it's so opposite of the way we look at our clergy. And not to say that rabbis aren't human and don't have, but this was really exaggerated. And then you wonder, were any of these people really smart? Maybe this Arthur Taub had his number, but I mean, even the guy, the Israeli actor who played the eventual prime minister of Israel, he fell for all this.
Right.
It just, I found the character development really interesting.
Yeah. I like the character development as well. I mean, I think that, I like it when a movie portrays characters in shades of gray, right? Occasionally you really feel for this guy who's the prime minister, Micha Eshel, but there's also no question that he's egotistical and venal and wants all of the comforts that this lifestyle brings to him. I mean, he's very happy about that stuff. The way the movie lingers on those shoes, when he becomes prime minister, that scene where you see him come in to address, I think it might actually be he's addressing people in the United States, right? But so before we see his face or anything about him, we see his feet walking across the stage, right? We see the shoes that Norman bought for him, which of course are such an integral part to the whole plot of the movie, is that it all ends up revolving around an expensive pair of shoes. But it also emphasizes how much he loves those shoes, right? He loves those comforts, and at the same time, when he makes that, there are these wonderful kind of set pieces in the movie, and one of them is when he becomes prime minister and it's late at night in the hotel room and he's takes off the shoes. It's a big show of taking off the shoes, and meets the guy from the State Department and tells him what kind of prime minister he's going to be, right? He's going to say yes to compromise. He's going to say yes to peace. And, there is a courage in that, right? So there is a real mix in these things. And by the end of the movie, you've got, this guy is going to be the prime minister. When I put together this list, I didn't have any idea what was going to be happening in the Middle East this week, right? But by the end of this movie, he's the prime minister who's actually going to make peace. It's kind of so there is this sort of shades of gray of that character. I love the other set piece I love is when he's in bed talking with his wife about his relationship with Norman, and and they kind of confront each other about how Norman maybe uses them, but they're using him too. He's not your friend, right? You use him when it's convenient for you to use him. Right? So in terms of the rabbi and the characterization of the rabbi, I think it's highly unlikely that an American filmmaker, not even the Coen brothers, would make a rabbi look quite like this rabbi, right? They were maybe not so kind to their rabbis in A Serious Man, but I think that those portrayals of the rabbis were affectionate spoofs of rabbis, right? In a serious man, you know.
They were benign. This is not benign.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm, like you said, Susan, the violence, he shows the language he uses. Look, any of you might be surprised at what rabbis say in the privacy of their, their own homes or something. It's certainly, the language is not language I haven't heard, let's say. But the way that character is portrayed, I think even some of the issues here, right? I'm fairly lost on American audiences, certainly outside of Jews. The idea that part of this deal, right? His nephew is going to get the prime minister's son into Harvard in exchange for the rabbi doing the conversion and marriage of this character Philip Cohen to she's divorced and a convert. Was that the issue, Vanessa? Do you remember? I think so.
Well, you can tell she's a convert because she's Asian. Like they
Yeah.
made it very, very clear. I think
the
yes,
rabbi
they
is
talked
willing
about
to do
that.
something that does not comport with his rabbinic understand, but he's willing to do it because there's going to be a $7 million benefactor in it, which is good for the congregation. It's good for him. So, but really, the idea that you would know from the fact that the character's name is Cohen, that he's a Kohen and therefore is not allowed in Orthodox tradition to marry a convert or a divorcee, right? So, but the rabbi will stretch his rules for that, right? That strikes me as only an Israeli filmmaker would make the rabbi do that. So, it is, this movie is, as I said, an American-Israeli co-production. I'm sure it did okay in Israel. I don't think many people in America saw it in its theatrical run. I remember reading a review of it when it came out in the New York Times, but I don't remember it ever playing in a movie theater here in the Chicago area. It's pretty inside the Jewish community, I'd say, in a lot of ways.
Rabbi, I also found it interesting when you talked about the peanut allergy.
Yeah.
And if we go all the way to the end of the movie and what Norman does at the end,
yeah,
I found that rather interesting also, that they used that peanut allergy the way they did.
Yeah. So it's certainly, I think there's this line that gets quoted from Anton Chekhov a lot, right? That if you see a gun in the first act, it has to go off in the third, right? So, it's pretty early on in the movie where the peanut allergy comes up, right? And as I said, I think maybe the only true thing we know about Norman is that he's allergic to peanuts. Nothing else he says can be taken at face value, right? At any point in the movie. So,
he says he has an EpiPen.
Right.
Because someone says, what do you do? And then when he dropped it down the sewer, I was like, what is that? And then I saw the peanuts. I'm like, oh, that's the EpiPen.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I should know what an EpiPen looks like.
EpiPen,
right.
So that he can't change his mind. Right.
Right. So my question to you is, did he eat the peanuts?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. Right. And his last thoughts are, he's fantasizing what happens after he eats the peanuts, right? The peace agreement gets signed, the kid goes to Harvard, the nephew gets married, the synagogue gets saved. All of those things happen because he eats the peanuts, right?
Interesting.
And so you said his character is pathetic, and I think it is pathetic in the most real meaning of that word, right? It has some pathos to it. It has, he is pathetic, and at the same time, right, it all hinges on him, you know, that if he can get out of testifying against the prime minister, all these other things will happen. And so, there's a genuine pathos in that. Sorry. They're closing my office door here because I'm talking too loud. But so I think, right, I mean, it's really, you know, I'm thinking of the art of the deal, right? And this is all about the art of the deal. And he's constantly on the make, trying to get this next deal to happen. He has something in common with, you know, Duddy Kravitz, a movie we watched a while back. You know, it's he's constantly looking for that connection. But at the same time, there is, I think, a genuine, all he wants to do is help. He you know, some of it is, yeah, he wants to be important and he wants to make money and all these things, but all he wants to do is help. He walks around saying that the scene with is her name the investigator, is she Anna?
Oh, wait a minute. I have it.
Alex.
Alex.
Alex, yes. She's played by a French actress, actually, Charlotte Gainsbourg, I think. Charlotte?
Charlotte.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, who I think is the daughter of the singer Serge Gainsbourg, and I think Jewish, right? At least her father was Jewish. So, but you know, when he gets on the train with her and starts a conversation, and I'm sure you probably all, wow, this guy should just be quiet, right? You know, he just, once he finds out who she is and what she does, he should stop talking, and he can't help himself, right? And all he wants to do is, you know, she calls him on it. She says, "You've talked about introducing me to 3 different people in 5 minutes. Do I look like I need help?" Right? And you know, he just can't help himself, both in terms of being quiet when he should be quiet. He can't do that, and he can't keep from making those you know, attempts at making connections, right? So even towards the end, when the prime minister's handlers, Doobie calls to, you know, has his assistant call and say, "We know who this businessman is, and he's a criminal, and he's this." You know, he says, "Well, now he'll go and say that to the investigator, and he'll make it 10 times worse," right? You know, so they don't at that point suspect that it's him. I'm not sure at what point in the movie it dawns on him that it's him. Maybe not until he gets into that locked room at the embassy, you know, when he goes in and surrenders his stuff and the door closes on one side and it's waiting for it to open on the other. You know, it feels like in that moment, maybe he realizes what a mistake this is to go in and talk there, and maybe only then realizes that that it's him, that he's the businessman who's being accused of corrupting the prime minister. And as we all know, it's all about a pair of shoes. Right? So,
Charlotte Gainsborough is Jewish, and her partner is Ivan Attai, also an Israeli French actor director.
yeah. Yeah, she's been in several things as well. I mean, I've seen her around in other movies. Can't remember exactly where at the moment, but her father is Serge, right? Serge Gainsbourg.
Yes.
Famous singer-songwriter from
Yeah.
France in the 60s and 70s. Right? I think her mother is a famous, beautiful actress as well. I can't think of who that is. Jane Birkin, maybe. So, other thoughts that you guys have? Did you like it? And if so, what did you like about it? Neil, you got to unmute. You're still muted.
All right, I got you. Wait, you're not on. There you go.
Okay,
There
I
you
was
go.
muted.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me ask you a question first. The copy that I watched did not translate the Hebrew. Was it translated in the other copies?
And be interested to hear what other people said. I think some of it, was translated in the version I watched, and some of it wasn't. I think there's something deliberate about that, actually. There are some things that aren't translated because it doesn't want us to know, right? And then there are other things that are translated when it does want us to know, right? So kind of in the sense where you think you should know what this means by the way they're saying it, right? But I don't know what, and of course, sometimes I think they are speaking English, right? When most of the time, now I can't even remember what was in and what wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I I think most of it was, and you kind of got a flavor for whatever, and some of it I could understand in the Hebrew, but when we talked to Adam Mansbach on Sunday, who wrote The Golem of Brooklyn, he doesn't translate all the Yiddish in his book on purpose. It's not that much. And, he wants to like give you the feeling. And I think it's the same here.
Well, I have to thank you for this one. I had never heard of this movie, and it was fabulous.
Yeah.
It was like a horror movie. The pathos was so strong. If I was watching this, I would have probably turned it off halfway through it, just to adjust my mind, and then watch it the next day. But every part of it was great. I wonder why Richard Gere did it. I know that he's a very spiritual guy. I think he's a Buddhist or a Hindu or something. But I think, the appeal of that character to him, is kind of an everyman. And the last 5 minutes of the movie, the way that, they ended it, it told you so much about his character that he really wasn't interested in making money. Remember the one time they asked him, "What do you want?" And then they cut it out. So you weren't going up that streak. I think early in the movie he said something about 7%. But boy, I think, I hate to use the word masterpiece, but the story itself was just fabulous.
It's certainly one of those, all the puzzle pieces fit together, right? By the time it's all said and done, in a way. We still don't know very much about him, but he says, "I just want to make people happy," right? That's what he wants. He wants to give everybody what they want. And in the end, he realizes the only way he can give everybody what they want is by eating the peanuts.
But of course, part of it was to make his life valid. I think they brought this up too. And you mentioned it earlier too, that I don't want to use the word important, but he didn't have a family, he didn't have a house. I think there was no mistake that they didn't show us these things, that he was a man that was trying so hard to make a mark, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot in the technique of the film that calls some of that stuff to mind too. There's a lot of you see him through windows. There's talking that's going on behind glass, so you don't actually hear what the characters are saying to each other. Now you see stuff like this a lot in international co-productions, in some ways, because if there's no dialogue, then if you speak Hebrew or you speak English, you understand it. It's almost like a silent film in places, right? But it's also pretty hard to write the dialogue for what actually happens in that room, right? So they leave that to our imagination.
I'd say I'd watch it again to pick up those details,
Yeah.
but I'm too old and it's too spooky.
Yeah. Yeah, there's it's broken up into acts. We have a foot in the door is act one. I think I wrote down the others. Act two is the right horse. Act three is the anonymous donor. And then I think there's one more act. Act four is the price of peace. Right. So and if you think about them, they each of these acts have their kind of set piece in the middle, a foot in the door is about meeting this young Israeli politician. The right horse is about that politician becoming the prime minister. The third act, my notes again. The anonymous donor is really about the synagogue and getting the money for the synagogue, and all of that deal, right, that's getting put together. And then act four is the price of peace, which of course kind of has this double meaning now in the movie. The actual price of peace, what it takes to have a prime minister get to the point of being able to sign a peace agreement, and the price of peace is eating the peanuts. Right? And by the way, the name Norman itself, right? I think the fact that it's one letter away from normal, I think actually is a key to this too, right? That you said every man, I think, Neil, right? I mean, he is, right? I mean, so Oppenheimer Strategies is not the right title for this movie in the end, even though that's what they are. By the way, that pays off his business card, when he meets that young man near the end, right, played by Hank Azaria, who gives him his card. And did you notice his card, Cyril Katz Strategies, right? That's the name of his business. It's him. It's nothing but a phone number. And he's there in all the scenes towards the end of the movie, including when he eats the peanuts and is sitting on the park bench and dying. He's out there playing a public piano in the winter in New York City, right? And there are those pianos like that around New York here and there. So sort of an interesting thing. I see, Babs, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the New York Times review, I like what it said. It said he's not really a businessman or a consultant, but he's really running a kind of social pyramid scheme, promising extravagant returns on small investments of kindness and courtesy.
Yeah. There are these moments in the movie where you see him saying thank you for insults, right? People insult him and he says thank you, right? There's a nice sort of shape to the movie that near the beginning, early in the morning, he's out in Central Park to catch up with this guy Bill on his morning run, and that happens again at the end of the movie, so that the movie comes around sort of full circle. Bill says, "I'm only listening to you for the sake of my father. You knew my father, right?" Well, maybe he did. We have no idea. Does he really know this guy? Can we trust any of the connections he's actually mentioned? Right? They're all mining for prospects, right? And the possibility of making the deal. But yeah, so keep that idea of a social pyramid scheme in your mind as we watch the next one about a real pyramid scheme, right? In The Wizard of Lies and the story of Bernie Madoff. So you might think of Bernie Madoff as being one of the characters like Joe Will for Arthur Taub in this movie, perhaps. But there's some interest. There are some really interesting parallels in these movies, I think.
Next week's movie, you can also buy on Prime for $3.99.
Okay,
It also might be on your Max subscription. If
yeah,
you have that subscription.
which if you get HBO, then you can get Max, but you can't always get it on your TV.
Right. You have to, and you have to log in.
My TV does not get Max on it, but some do. Like if you have an Apple TV, I think you can get
Right.
Max on. So anyway, so
I'm gonna have to talk to my husband about.
yeah, it's a little
But
more
either
complicated.
log me in or I gotta spend $4.
So
I
but there-
got my movies from the library.
Oh,
Two
that's
of the,
great.
yeah, great. So there's I love some of these early on when he's talking to his nephew and he wants to talk to somebody else, he says, "Can I say I'm your uncle?" And he says, "No." You can say you know me, right? Right? And so other things, I think the dialogue's really very good, very clever. The stuff about being a good swimmer, which comes up at the beginning. You're like a drowning man trying to flag down an ocean liner. Right? He says, "Yeah, but I'm a good swimmer as long as I can keep my head above water." And then by the end, he's the drowning man, and there's only one thing left to do, and it's drown, right? Even though he's a good swimmer. So
I also think the whole 6 degrees of separation, and in Israel it's less. In Israel, everyone always, oh, I know blah 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 who knows the prime minister, and I know this one who knows that one. So I thought that was all super realistic.
yeah, I'm not sure how far I'd go in terms of realism in this movie.
Yeah.
but I don't know. I mean, it's circles I don't travel in, so hard to say really. But just sort of compressed. Although there is a time frame here, right? I mean, it's 3 years from the time he meets Eshel and buys him shoes to Eshel becoming prime minister. So it tells us. So this deal is playing the long game in a lot of ways. And then there are just some of these wonderful shots, like when he finally is so desperate to get in touch with Eshel that he calls his private number, and we see Eshel's closet, right, and all the fine clothing and stuff in the closet. And if I'm not mistaken, the phone is actually in the shoes, right, in the closet. So, so very, very clever in some ways. So much of this movie takes place over the phone. It made me think of there's novels that are written in letters, right? The epistolary novel. Okay, this is the film equivalent of that, right? A story that's told through phone calls. Vanessa, you and I have talked on occasion about movies that you can't make movies like you used to because now you would just get on the phone and call somebody, right? And all these suspense movies that don't work in the same way since there are cell phones. Here's a movie that really uses cell phones as a storytelling device, right? It's very clever in the way that it works that way.
Except the one thing that I thought of, and this is, this was made in 2017, is him going into the synagogue. That just wouldn't happen now. We all have security. You can't just get in and go into the refrigerator and get the Vita herring, and which is sad. In a way, for me, it's sad that you can tell when that movie was made because there hadn't been as many threats to the Jewish. That's also before Tree of Life.
Yeah.
I just want to point out also that when he went into the synagogue, he never went in the front entrance. He was always going in a back entrance, which may or may not have been locked, but the front entrance might have been open, but he never went to it.
Right. Yeah. we never, it's interesting, we don't until in his visions, I think at the end, we don't actually see a synagogue service either. You know, there's fundraising meeting, right? And there's practice, you know, he goes into the sanctuary, but he's watching choir practice. They're singing Misha Berach, by the way. That's the traditional Misha Berach is what's actually being sung, the prayer for health. So I think that's an interesting and very deliberate choice here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Sandy.
Yeah, I love that scene where he was insisting on buying the shoes. He
Yeah.
kept on insisting,
Yeah.
and finally he gave in to him. And then when the guy put the bill in front of him and he went to sign it, his eyes almost fell out of his head when he saw the
It's
price of the shoes.
$1,200 pair of shoes.
Right.
He didn't have to buy the suit, right? So, but it's you know, for him, it's the price of doing business in a sense. But you know, right? It's all about making that deal, making that personal capital, so that Eshel will remember who he is, right? So, but in some very real way, I mean, he does a real service. You know, it's not just buying the shoes, right? I mean, we see this character Eshel is feeling very low, you know, in these moments in New York, that his political career is over, he thinks, and all this stuff. And you know, his contact with Norman is good for him. And then I love that scene when he comes back to New York as prime minister and sees Norman and gives him the hug. And all of a sudden, Norman has a whole different, you know, everybody wants to know who this guy Norman Oppenheimer is, right? Everybody wants to be, all of a sudden, there's this whole montage of the whole Jewish community, you know, coming up and talking to Norman, right? It's, you know, that's another one of these just sort of remarkably showy sort of parts of the movie. It reminds me a little, see, I think what movie is that? I think it might be The Graduate, right? Where Benjamin Braddock, played by Dustin Hoffman, all these people at a party keep coming up and talking to him. And each one of them is sort of a caricature of you know, what it means to be a nouveau riche suburbanite or something. So there's some I don't think this movie's deliberately referencing that per se, but it just is a reminder of that. So a lot of mirrors. There's a point where I think Norman is in I think he may be in Bergdorf's, and he is looking in a mirror, and it's one of those dressing rooms, like, so there's a mirror behind him and in front of him. So you see a kind of an endless repetition of the back of his head and his face going off into the distance, right? You know, I think those things are, you know, both elegantly composed shots in the movie, but also sort of indicative of, you know, you see this character from all different angles and don't really know anything about him. So there's a lot to like about it. So this movie. Closing thoughts? Anybody want the last word?
Sandy.
Different subject. We've hardly slept for a couple of weeks. Dave and I are so tired. We watch television till 3 a.m. most nights, just following the news. And our grandson is up there, down there at the border with Gaza. He's been there since October 8th.
Yeah.
And today we got the most beautiful picture. He sent us this picture. We hadn't heard from him in about 3 days. And then we got a picture. Someone brought his wife to the border, and it showed him hugging his wife. They're newlyweds. He just got
Oh.
married this last year. This was their first anniversary in October. And he just looks so happy to see her. He looks dead tired. He looks dead tired. He's in full, battle gear in every picture. But it was such a pleasure to see him smiling and hugging his wife. Anyway, I'm just happy this
We're
afternoon.
thinking about him, we're thinking about all the kids that grew up here that are there. There's a lot. There's a lot of very close connections in our community. So we're certainly thinking about everybody over there. And I don't know that we're thinking enough about those guys who are sort of sitting there in full gear, because they don't, there hasn't been a time like this in a long time where they don't know when they're going to be called into action,
Right.
what's going to happen next. And that waiting is like waiting for surgery or something, there's no getting away from it. So I hope you and David can get some sleep, and I know it's probably playing with all of our sleep habits a little bit, but you guys with folks on the front line, it's really hard. So
just a couple of reminders. Tomorrow, Rabbi Mafik will be Influential Jews, and that's at 2:00. No, wait a minute. Yeah, that's tomorrow, Thursday. You lose track of the days. This Sunday, Jimmy Tabor is the director of North American Abraham Initiatives, is going to update us on the importance of protecting shared society during this time of conflict. It'll be really interesting to hear what he has to say. And if you have any other questions, you know where you can get a hold of me. And it's good to see everybody here.
That program on Sunday is another one of those programs was planned long before anything like this was going on.
Exactly. And listen, and we
on a different tone.
Yeah, we changed the topic. So Marcia, yes.
No, I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh,
it was a wonderful session.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see everybody next week.
Nice to be back doing this. And
Yeah.
So next week, The Wizard of Lies with Robert De Niro, another non-Jew playing a Jewish character. It's directed by Barry Levinson.
Okay.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.